Well, good morning. It's Easter Sunday. Today is an Easter like we've never known before, as millions of people in the United States and around the world are staying in their homes to avoid a disease that has affected over 1 million people and claimed thousands of lives. But with all that's happening around us, this morning we'll talk about Easter. It starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
As you can see, I'm not in my usual spot. As I've mentioned before, to protect employees, TV6 has many working from home, and that includes me. Today we do want to tell the Easter story, because I know that for many of you, your traditional Easter Sunday morning in church will not be happening because of the restrictions on any gatherings. So this morning we'll look back in our archives and hear from two people who have joined us on Easter Sunday mornings in the past. A little later, we'll be talking with someone many TV6 viewers remember as Vicki Crystal. But first, part of a conversation we had 2 years ago with Rev Leon Jarvis. At the time, he had just retired after serving for many years as the chaplain at Marquette General Hospital. I asked Rev Jarvis what message he would bring to a congregation on an Easter Sunday morning.
Well, what I would talk about primarily is the fact of the empty tomb that we have worked up during Holy Week to this particular morning, and to focus on the fact that the empty tomb is indeed empty. The Lord has risen, our hope is restored, and that as we go forth now from this point this year, we have this understanding that we truly are the children of God, and as a result, we have with us the resurrected Christ.
And we'll talk more about this, but certainly as a chaplain at a hospital, you deal with death frequently.
Sure.
Is there a message in Easter that can help us through
Definitely. The empty tomb is the message. Okay. That for Christians, they, in their baptisms, they die with the Lord, and they also rise with the Lord. And this is a true indication of that. The empty tomb is letting us know that, yes, Jesus Christ is risen. And in the church, we would say, Christ is risen, alleluia, alleluia, risen indeed, alleluia. So it gives us hope in our deaths that there is something beyond the physical death, and that is life eternal with Jesus.
Okay. Let's talk about you a little bit. You, when you were 18 years old, decided to become involved with the Capuchin group, is that?
Mm-hmm. Franciscan Capuchins.
What brought you in that direction?
I was one of those young men who sought priesthood and being in an order, but as a little boy, I used to play priest.
Okay.
And
I played radio announcer. But
well, look where we are.
That's right.
We fulfilled what we did as children. The idea of me playing priest, and I would use my mother's wine glass and as a chalice, and it was a desire of mine on and off growing up. And so when I graduated from high school, I applied to the Franciscan Capuchin order. It's an associate program preparing you. You discern if you're really called to live a life of priesthood, or if you choose to be a brother in an order. And so I was in the association for 2 years.
And after that, then you went on to the next step in the process?
The next step was I discerned that I was not a Capuchin or a Franciscan, what they call a mendicant order type of guy. So I found a monastic order in the Detroit area. So I entered the Sylvestrian congregation of the Order of St. Benedict. I became a Benedictine.
Okay. And as part of that, you became very involved in some charity work, didn't you?
Well, in the 10 years I was in the monastery, many years I worked with the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul, a group of sisters, Roman Catholic sisters, whose primary focus was education, health care, and social work. And I was in the social work division working at St. Vincent Sarah Fisher Center for children and youth who had emotional disability or learning disability, that they were taken out of their homes for either abuse and neglect or because they had some mental health issues that didn't allow them to stay in the home.
Other than that work, what was life like as a
monk?
As a Benedictine monk?
We prayed 7 times a day. I lived in community. There were 16 of us at the height of when we were fullest, or most full. Our life was lived by the church calendar. And so we lived the motto of the Benedictines is ora et labora, which means to pray and to work. And so we prayed throughout the day, and we worked throughout the day. We had an orchard, hundreds of apple trees. We had beef cattle, I think 30 head. We had a print shop, excuse me. So we also did parish work on weekends. The order was founded, the Benedictine order is 1,500 years old, but our particular congregation was founded in the 13th century. So we were very similar to the mendicant orders, the Franciscans and Dominicans, in that we went out to parishes and worked on weekends.
But at some point you decided this wasn't the life for you.
After 10 years, I decided that, I discerned actually, prayerfully, that it was time to leave. That I was properly dispensed by Rome. And it was hard, but I was ready. And through discernment and prayer and working with my superiors, I left.
And I think part of the reason, we had a little chat before, was you kind of wanted to get from being a father in the church to being a father at some
Yes. I was getting this desire to have children, which of course you can't do in an order. And over a couple of years of discernment, working, like I said, with prayer and with the superiors, I decided that, yeah, I wanted to be a dad.
We'll continue our conversation with Reverend Jarvis, including a story of a very special experience he had while serving as the chaplain at Marquette General Hospital, after we take this 2-minute break. Returning to our conversation with Reverend Leon Jarvis, we talked about how he came to Marquette and his career headed in some different directions.
Well, when we got married, my wife and I, we decided to come here 6 months after our wedding for a trip. We didn't have a honeymoon, so in May, in the beginning of June, we took a vacation to the Upper Peninsula. And I had been talking about becoming a nurse, and we came through the Upper Peninsula, stopped in Marquette, looked at the hospital. My wife was a respiratory therapist, and so we continued on our way, went up to Copper Country, went home, and when we got home, there was a full-page ad for a respiratory therapist at Marquette General. And so we decided to move here, and so that I could go to school. Okay. So I went to Northern, to the nursing school of nursing at that time, and I became an LPN and did part of my training at MGH, and eventually went back and was hired to work on the rehab unit as a nurse. So yeah, and I wanted to be a nurse. There's not much former monks do.
No, we're going to have to jump ahead because you ultimately became the chaplain.
Yes.
And even though at that point you weren't an ordained minister, and
no.
That kind of slowed the process down a little, didn't it?
I applied. At that time, the executive was Bob Reka, and I talked to him about it, and he took it to Bill Nemechek, who took it to the board, because I wasn't ordained. But I had a divinity background, and I also had a nursing background. Right. So it sort of like was a good blend, and it took a while. There was a few administrative things that had to be done. And 6 months later, it was finally decided that yes, they would make the exception because I wasn't ordained to become the chaplain for the hospital.
And talk about what is the role of a hospital chaplain?
It is to provide compassionate care, being engaged with patients and families, trying to comfort those who are fearful of the hospitalization, also fearful of perhaps the procedure or operation that they're going into. There's also individuals who are having major surgery who fear death, and trying to minister to them in a comfortable way, not, to alleviate some of that anxiety with prayer and presence and being engaging and understanding. I think those are the qualities one needs to be able to engage with hospital patients in healthcare, to make it, as far as spiritual care, a positive experience.
And as far as some of these people go, some probably don't have a church connection at that point in their
Well,
life.
it's interesting because I was chaplain to everyone, not just Christians, but I had a young woman who was Muslim that I was chaplain to her. I was actually interviewed on the BBC after she had died, and I cared for her spiritually as a Muslim. And so they came to interview me, and it aired throughout the Arab world.
Okay. I think I remember that.
Yeah, here's this Christian priest
Right.
providing Muslim prayers for this young woman who tragically died as a result of her husband beating her to death. So, and I talked to her dad. That was very interesting. He and I would talk using the technology we have now. And we talked, because I'm from the Detroit area and I grew up in Dearborn, which is the largest concentration of Arab-speaking Muslims in the United States. At least I had some understanding of what he was asking for. And he first wanted me to inquire if we could bury her in the Detroit area. And I explained to him, and I said, there's no one there. But here, if we bury her at Park, we'll all be here. And the city was very kind. They provided a space for her. And Jeremy Hansen provided services. And we buried her according to Muslim custom. And I think that's, again, a reflection of our community. Everyone pulled together, everyone, and till this day, you can see her monument from, was that 7th? Mm-hmm. And I drive by it all the time, and I just was there at her grave the other day. As I told her dad, as long as I draw a breath, and as long as I live in this city, his daughter will be remembered, and I will visit her. So.
A very special story from our guest, Rev Leon Jarvis. When I return, we'll talk with a former familiar face here at TV6. Well, last Easter morning, I had the pleasure of welcoming back a face very familiar to TV6 viewers. Vicki Crystal was an anchor on the morning news for 16 years and left that position to answer a call to become a pastor in the Methodist Church. We were pleased to welcome her back as Pastor Vicki Pruett and asked her to talk about her new assignment.
Well, what I'm doing right now is I am serving 2 communities in Iron County. I am serving the United Methodist Church at Crystal Falls as well as Amasa Grace. So 2 new communities for me to get to know people in.
What was Easter like for you as you were a kid growing up?
You know what was interesting is when I was a kid, we didn't do a whole lot. We would have baskets and we would have candy in there and jelly beans. Everybody'd throw the black ones at each other because nobody liked the black licorice. Right. I loved it. We would make eggs the week before or the day before. We would make the Easter eggs and we would have Easter egg fights. About middle school, beginning of high school, things changed a little bit because that's when I got my first big present, an Andy Gibb album, the very first one. It was like, oh, I was so excited. Easter changed a little bit then. And as I grew older and started working and walking more in my faith, I came to realize that Easter had a deep importance in my life. And so it's always a change, when you hit Easter.
Did you have the church tradition when you were a kid? I know you did at Christmas.
Yeah, we did. And, we would go on Easter Sunday and then come home and have a big celebration at the house, have our ham and things like that. But it was a little bit different. It wasn't quite as overwhelming. Christmas seems to come and it's there forever and ever and ever. And when we do Easter, you have such a time of preparation first that you're pulling back so much that Easter is like the kapow moment, and then you get into the joy of the rest of the year. Okay.
This is, I Well, let me ask you,
Sure.
is this or Christmas the biggest day in the Easter Christian faith?
Well, let me put it to you this way. If you looked just from the outside world, the secular world, there is no doubt that Christmas is overwhelming. It's such a joyful, happy time. We have mixed feelings about Easter because it all starts with the joy of Palm Sunday because it was such a happy occasion. Like I said, we're walking out of Lent, which is a very time of where you do a lot of introspection and deep talks with yourself. And so then you hit Palm Sunday with the joy. And then you hit Maundy, Thursday, where you start to realize that the weekend, that memory of that time of what happened is coming. The different emotions we hit with Good Friday. Right. It's Easter is an emotional roller coaster. That's what it is. And not everybody likes emotional roller coasters. You hit Good Friday, there's sadness, there's anger, there's guilt, there's all sort of things mixed in there. And if you were reliving that time, you're thinking, how do I overcome all of these emotions that hit? And then you get to wait. You're waiting and waiting and you're thinking it's never going to change. And then Sunday morning rolls around and then you're hit with overwhelming joy and happiness and love. I mean, you're up and down on your emotions.
I'm certain. What's the message you're going to share with your members of your church on this Sunday?
Well, I've been thinking about it, and I haven't completely written it yet, but the thing that I really like about Easter is I love how God bookends things and how it all started in a garden and a broken promise to God and fear in the Garden of Eden once that first fruit is eaten. And then in another garden where sins are forgiven and redemption is found and there is hope for the future. Oh, I love how those two gardens are a reflection of each other and how we've brought to the lowest lows and the highest highs in between those two times. That's kind of the feeling I'm going for.
And certainly for Christians, the birth of Jesus was very important.
Absolutely.
But his death and resurrection and what that means for Christians certainly has to be.
And that's the real message. It's a spiritual thing. And I know that there are people probably watching who have doubts, they don't believe. You know what? That's okay. God still believes in them and still has a course for them and is still waiting to forgive them when they ask for it. And I think that's the thing. It's available for everybody. You think you got to jump through all these hoops, and really all you have to do is have faith and believe. And it's an amazing thing because on the end, it's really easy, but yet not.
It was great to have Vicki back on last year's show, and we wish her the very best on this Easter Sunday. I'll be back with some other thoughts in just 2 minutes. A couple of thoughts before we leave this morning. First, as I said earlier, this is an Easter like we've never seen before, with churches closed all over the country on a day that many Christians see as the most holy day of the year. I'm glad we were able to bring you some thoughts about Easter today, as we heard from two former guests who were here on Easter's past. You know, as I was looking through some other past shows, I saw another that was broadcast on Easter several years ago. It featured Reverend Thomas Screenus, who was then the Bishop of the Northern Great Lakes Lutheran Synod. His words were especially meaningful today as we sit in our homes on this Easter morning. Here's what he had to say. He said, "I encourage people to be part of a Christian community. You can't do this Christian thing by yourself. You have to do it as a community, with a group of fellow Christians, whatever Christian church that is, that you get together with people and pray about things and think about things, and you'll find your faith being built stronger all the time." Those were the words of Bishop Screenus on an Easter show several years ago. Hopefully, on a Sunday not too far in the future, we can all do that again. And now a thought about the situation we all find ourselves in today. You know, one of the phrases we hear frequently today, as we are all forced to stay in our homes, is, "I can't wait to get back to normal." I've said it many times over the past couple of weeks. And as I was thinking about it, this thought crossed my mind. What if we don't get back to normal? Suppose we're faced with a new normal, whatever that might be. It's important to remember that normal is not permanent. What was normal 100 years ago when airline travel was just getting off the ground would not be normal today. What was normal 64 years ago when TV6 brought the first television programs to Upper Michigan would not be normal today. What we think of as normal changes all the time, but it's usually because we find a better way of doing things. But what about today, when our lives have been changed dramatically by a virus? As we consider things like viruses, and there are other dangerous examples lurking out there, does the way we live our lives have to change? I'm not making predictions. I don't have the answers, but it's something to think about. Will restaurants find new ways to serve us? Will retailers determine better ways to fulfill our needs? Will professional sports and theaters and other entertainment venues devise new ways to showcase their products? Hard to believe looking at it today, but who knows? One thing I do know, if everything changes, the entrepreneurs who can help us adjust to a new normal, a new lifestyle, will be the most successful people of the next generation. Let me make sure I emphasize one point. I'm not suggesting that even if life as we know it does change, that we're only headed for unpleasant times ahead. Throughout our history, as what we thought of as normal changed, it was for the better. It's hard to imagine that now, but there's no reason to think it won't be the same again. Foolish thoughts from a guy going a little stir-crazy from staying at home? Perhaps. Only time will tell. Back in a minute. Well, that's our show for this Sunday morning. I do wish you and your family a very happy Easter. I hope that even with the challenges we face, you will find ways to enjoy the rest of this day. Let's hope for happier days ahead. Stay safe. Follow the guidelines that have been put in place to help us do that. And thanks for joining us this week. I look forward to seeing you again next Sunday morning.